Imagine hiking alone through the Alaskan backcountry, no sound but wind and boots on snow, and then footsteps behind you, soft, uneven, desperate. You turn. It's not a hunter, not another hiker. It's a tiny grizzly bear cub, limping and staring straight at you, refusing to turn back. He follows you for 2 kilometers through cold and quiet, through danger and doubt, begging for help the only way he knows how, by not giving up. What happens next will stay with you forever. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications, because stories like this remind us how compassion and instinct can bridge even the wildest gaps. Caleb Madsen had seen a lot in his 38 years as a wildlife surveyor: snowstorms, moose stampedes, wolves crossing his trail at twilight, but he'd never seen anything like this. He was 4 days into a solo mapping hike near Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It was remote, icy, and the kind of silence only wilderness could offer. He liked that until the silence broke. It started as a faint rustle, then a shuffle, then a presence. He turned. There, standing between 2 snow-heavy spruce trees, was a grizzly cub, small, no older than 7 months. Its coat was clumped with frost, its eyes wide, and one paw dragged through the snow. No snarl, no growl, no threat, just that look. Caleb froze. He scanned the horizon, scanned again. A sow nearby would mean danger, but there was nothing. No sound, no scent, no movement. Just the cub watching, limping forward. He took a step away, the cub followed. 1 kilometer passed, then another. Every time he stopped, it stopped too. At first, Caleb thought it might lose interest, but it didn't. It kept limping after him, panting, whimpering, always 10 meters behind, never any closer, never farther. It wasn't just following, it was pleading. And Caleb knew he couldn't ignore it much longer. He crouched low, didn't speak, just looked. The cub tilted its head, then collapsed to its belly in the snow, sides heaving. "You're not lost," Caleb whispered. "You've already found someone." That night, the fire was small but steady. Caleb set up camp in a dense patch of spruce, using a ridge to block the wind. The air bit through his gloves, but his thoughts were elsewhere. 10 meters away, just beyond the reach of firelight, lay the cub. It hadn't left, it hadn't tried to come closer either, just lay there, curled up, watching. Caleb poked at the embers, then stared into the dark. Everything he knew said, "Don't interfere. Wild animals stay wild. Let nature take its course." And yet, what part of this felt natural? He looked over again. The cub shivered, its body rose and fell quickly with every breath. One paw twitched. "Maybe you're just waiting," Caleb said under his breath. He opened his pack, pulled out a sealed pouch of trail meat, tore off a strip, and tossed it just past the firelight. The cub didn't move at first, then cautiously it rose, limped forward, nose low to the snow. It stopped just at the edge of the light, eyes on Caleb, 1 second, 2, then it took the meat, a few more paces, and returned to its spot. Curled back into a ball, it didn't run, didn't challenge, just accepted what it was given. Caleb exhaled slowly. He hadn't just fed a bear, he'd answered a question. And now, there was no turning away. By morning, the wind had calmed, frost coated his boots. He packed slowly, unsure what the cub would do. As he slung on his gear and began walking, he glanced back. There it was, following. Not out of instinct, not out of habit, but out of trust. Caleb didn't smile, didn't speak, but he didn't stop it either. The rules were clear, but sometimes doing the right thing doesn't follow the rules, it follows the heart. By midday, the snow began again, not heavy at first, just fine flakes drifting sideways on a bitter wind. But Caleb had been in enough backcountry to know what it meant. The light snow was the start of something worse. He picked up the pace. Behind him, the cub limped faster too, as if sensing the urgency. The trail narrowed through an open pass with no cover, just frozen tundra stretching in every direction. Caleb knew they needed shelter. He scanned the map in his head. There was a ranger hut, old, possibly half-collapsed, about 5 kilometers south, too far. But there was a rock overhang just half a kilometer ahead. He'd scouted it once before. If they could reach it, they might wait out the worst of the storm. Snow thickened, the wind howled, Caleb's beard frosted over, his gloves stiff with ice. Still, he moved. He looked back often, each time, the cub was there, slower, struggling. Caleb stopped, dropped his pack, and ran back. The cub had collapsed in a snow drift, eyes dull, chest rising slowly, one paw buried. "Come on," Caleb whispered, crouching low. "Don't quit now." He didn't touch it, just stayed near. He reached into his pack, more meat, his last ration, and held it out. The cub lifted its head, barely took the food, chewed slowly. 10 minutes passed, then the cub stood again. Together, they made the last 300 meters, step by freezing step. They reached the rock shelf just as the whiteout hit. Caleb pulled a tarp across the gap, built a quick windbreak from branches and his own coat. The cub lay curled against the rock wall, trembling. That night, the wind screamed like wolves, but inside the little makeshift hollow, there was only the sound of breathing, one man, one bear, side by side. Not enemies, not wild and human, just 2 lives refusing to give up on each other. The storm stayed for 3 days. Caleb rationed what little he had, melted snow for water, a few protein bars broken in half, every crumb mattered. And beside him, the cub, he began calling it Ash, rested more easily with each night. Its breathing steadied, the tremble in its limbs softened. But its paw still looked swollen, and it limped worse after sleep. They stayed under the rock shelf like ghosts in a pocket of stillness. Outside, the wind raged. Inside, Ash began nudging closer, first near Caleb's boots, then beside the pack, then one morning, curled almost touching his sleeping bag. Caleb didn't move him away. There was something in the way Ash looked at him, not like a pet, but like an equal, a survivor. On the second night, Caleb woke coughing. The tarp had flapped open in the wind, letting in a blast of snow. Ash was already awake, standing, watching the opening, protecting. By the 4th morning, the snow eased. Caleb stepped outside to stretch. The sky was blue-gray, silent, trees glazed in white. Ash limped after him. Caleb looked at him. "You ready to move again?" The cub tilted its head and took one step closer. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was something deeper, a bond neither had planned for, but neither wanted to let go. The morning air was sharp, but the sky finally clear. Pale gold light crept across the snow as Caleb secured the last strap of his pack. Ash sat at the edge of the rock shelf, ears perked, eyes tracking each movement. Caleb couldn't tell whether the cub was anxious or excited, maybe both. They set out slowly. Ash still limped, but the rest had helped. Caleb moved at a pace that didn't push him too hard. Every few steps he glanced over his shoulder, not because he expected the cub to wander off, but because he didn't want to miss a moment of it still being there. There was something solemn in their path now, not just urgency, but purpose. Their goal, an old research cabin Caleb had marked 3 years prior. It was remote, used mostly in emergencies. It might still have basic supplies, bedding, water filters, maybe even food rations if the squirrels hadn't gotten to them. It was 8 kilometers west. The route was rough, uphill climbs, icy ridges, fallen trees under drifts of snow. Ash struggled at times, panting heavily. By midday, Caleb stopped often, offering bits of dried bark Caleb soaked to soften, and snow melt from his canteen. They passed fox tracks, all shadows. At one point, a howl cut across the ridge, distant but real. Wolves. Ash froze. Caleb raised a hand slowly. They waited. Silence. They moved again. As daylight thinned, the forest darkened with shadows. Ash walked closer now, almost brushing Caleb's side. Caleb didn't step away. By twilight, they reached a ridgeline that overlooked a narrow valley below. The old cabin was still standing, smoke chimney intact, windows fogged with frost. A miracle. They made the final descent just as the last light bled from the sky. Caleb opened the door slowly. The interior smelled of dust and old pine, cold but intact. A small cot in one corner, a rusted stove, shelves with rusted tins and yes, a box of sealed protein bars still vacuum-packed. Ash curled immediately in a corner by the stove. Caleb lit the last of his fire starters. The tiny flame caught for the first time in over a week. They were safe. That night, Caleb sat near Ash and watched him sleep. The cub twitched in dreams. When Caleb reached out slowly and rested a hand on his shoulder, Ash didn't wake, didn't flinch, just breathed in the quiet of that little cabin. Caleb understood something. Helping Ash hadn't been a decision, it had been a calling. Tomorrow, they'd face something even harder, finding help and letting go. The morning was still when Caleb opened the cabin door. Snow crackled beneath his boots as he stepped outside, eyes fixed on the sky. The clouds were thinning. Somewhere beyond the trees, the world was moving again, civilization, roads, people who had no idea that deep in the wilderness, a man and a bear cub were surviving together. Ash stepped outside moments later, blinking into the light. He was steadier on his feet now, though he still limped. His body looked stronger, his eyes clearer, and he didn't hesitate to walk beside Caleb, nose twitching as he sniffed the wind. They ate in silence. Caleb split another protein bar, and Ash gnawed at his half with focus. It was more than survival now, it was habit, routine, almost family. And that was the problem. Caleb stared at the cub for a long time after breakfast. "You can't come with me forever." The words hung in the air. They weren't meant for Ash, they were meant for himself. He retrieved the emergency transceiver from his pack, a last resort, solar-charged beacon. He'd used it only once before. If he triggered it now, search and rescue could find them in 48 hours. They'd bring a snowmobile, a ranger, maybe even a vet. But they wouldn't let Ash stay with him. The laws were clear: wild animals belonged in rehabilitation or back in the wild, not with people, not in homes, not on leashes. Caleb set the beacon on the table. His hand hovered above it. Ash watched as if he knew. That night, the decision crushed him. He sat by the fire, Ash curled beside him. For the first time, the cub pressed his weight fully against Caleb's leg. Caleb didn't move. He couldn't. He stayed up hours after Ash fell asleep. He remembered his father's hands, rough and calloused, the way they held his after his first fall in the woods. He remembered the old dog they'd rescued from a ditch and how it had followed him for a year before it passed. He remembered what it felt like to choose kindness over convenience. And he thought about Ash, not as a project, not even as a wild thing, but as someone who had trusted him. He triggered the beacon at dawn. Ash startled at the sound. Caleb knelt, wrapped his arms gently around the cub, held him. "They'll take care of you. Maybe even better than I could," but his voice cracked. He wasn't sure if it was true. The next 36 hours passed in slow motion. Ash stayed close. Caleb spoke less. Every time Ash looked up, it felt like a question. The answer never came easy. On the third day, the rescue helicopter arrived. A ranger stepped out. She wore the green and gray of the service. Her voice was kind, her touch gentle. She knelt beside Ash with calm, practiced hands. Ash didn't resist. He just looked back at Caleb. And Caleb broke. He turned, walked into the trees, and let himself cry. Letting go isn't failure. Sometimes it's the bravest thing love can do. 3 years passed. Caleb never forgot. He returned to wrangle St. Elias every fall, keeping the same routes, tracing the old paths with his maps and memory. Every bend in the forest trail, every snow-covered ridge echoed faint impressions, Ash's tiny paw prints, his soft whimpers, his head resting beside a boot. The world had gone on. Caleb had taken a job training younger rangers. He told them the rules: follow protocol, respect the wild, stay distant. But deep down, he remembered the one time he didn't follow protocol and how it changed everything. He never asked about Ash at the station. Some part of him feared the answer. Maybe Ash hadn't made it. Maybe the transition back to the wild hadn't worked. Or maybe they'd kept him in captivity. But one autumn morning, while crossing a frozen creek bed, Caleb noticed fresh tracks in the snow, bare prints, big but not full-grown, and different. The right front paw dragged slightly, just enough to notice. He followed the tracks, heart racing, rational mind arguing against what hope dared whisper. The trail wound toward a clearing where the river curved through birch groves. Caleb stepped out of the trees and froze. There, standing near the water, was a grizzly, alone, taller than Ash had ever been, heavier, coat thick and golden brown. Eyes locked on Caleb. They stared at each other for a long time. Neither moved. Then the bear stepped forward, just one step, then it stopped, lowered its head, sniffed the air. And in that moment, Caleb saw it, the slight limp, the familiar eyes. Ash. He didn't charge. He didn't growl. He just looked as if remembering. Caleb slowly removed his glove, raised a hand. Ash watched, then with a low huff, he turned, walked to the riverbank, and sat. Caleb sat too, 50 feet apart, not touching, not speaking, just sharing the moment. A human. A bear. Two creatures who had met in fear, survived in trust, and parted in pain, now meeting again. Caleb stayed until sunset. When he stood, Ash stood too. For a moment, it felt like neither of them wanted to leave. But they did. Each walked a separate way. No leash. No collar. No cage. Just freedom. Just memory. Just something the wilderness and the heart would never let go of. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that compassion has no species, and courage often means letting go. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs hope today, because sometimes the wild remembers more than we ever imagine.